Hello, it's Ren Presents time. I'm your host, Ren, and today we continue with the House of Bloodstein, Mentralysis, Part 3, Chapter 8, The Dead Fall from the Sky. Previous chapter, Kay finally encounters the horrendous, immortal tyrant Queen Ghome in her place of power on the planet Adama Thrombo, the one with all the creepy dead guys in the sky. Kay had created a shadow tech simulacrum of himself and Leica and fooled Queen Ghome, and she took out all her hostilities on the simulacrum, and then Kay attacked. First, Queen Ghome had been suitably creepy and scary and sliced Sam's face and ears off and did all kinds of horrible things to herself. And then her attendants came in with this giant skiff full of body parts, and Queen Ghome selected herself a brand new face and body free of all of Sam's parts. Kay engaged her in combat. He sampled firsthand the power of her aboleth armor invention. Had he not been wearing that suit, he would be dead, and we would be rolling the credits on this book even as we speak. Fortunately, his suit held. Queen Ghome tried to escape as shit started to break down on her. She always has an escape route hidden that she can make easy use of to flee an unfavorable situation, but unfortunately, there was an inferno waiting for her on the other side of the Geller door, a fire set by Philip, Thomasina, and King, so she couldn't escape. Overcome by smoke, Kay takes her down and puts on the necklace of Wilhelm of Wham and the headset of Wilhelm of Wham that he found in a display case that she just had sitting out, that of items she thought were pretty but otherwise worthless. She didn't know what she had or what those items actually did, and that was a colossal blunder. Kay found them, put them on her, and she fell unconscious, and they're awaiting her awakening, seemingly out of the fight, but no, a good villain never goes down for the count in round 1. This is the beginning of round 2. Thanks once again to my good friend and cover artist, Carol Phillips. The beautiful artwork you see here at the beginning of the book was painted by Carol, as were many of the other pieces of artwork I've been displaying, painted by Carol, a person of amazing talents, and I was very fortunate to get her to do Queen Ghome's voice last week. There is no Carol this week, as, well, you'll see. Let's just get to it. Enough of my tomfoolery and mucking about. Let's do it. Part 3. Chapter 8, The Dead Fall from the Sky. Leica gazed down on Queen Ghome, her ferocity gone. "Mother?" she asked tenderly, shaking her gently on the shoulder. Ghome lay on the ground, her breathing shallow, eyes shut in cloudy slits, mouth flaccid, sharp teeth glinting in the sun. She was unresponsive. "Mother does not stir," Leica said. Kay was puzzled. "I think I recall Jana Del Levy telling me it will take a little while before she awakens." He felt her pulse. It was steady. Her breast rose and fell. "Let's give her some time. When she awakes, Rothaba should be with us." Kay knelt and adjusted her body into a comfortable position on the ground. "First thing we should do when she awakes is to get rid of these horns and these teeth and do her up in something more becoming," Kay said. As they waited for Rothaba to rise, Kay took stock of the situation. The enclosure was a mess, full of destroyed, smashed, and in some cases burning Jones equipment, trampled creeper plants, dead bodies, and shattered statue beasts. Taldaroga lay in the center of the compound, while Ghome's sleeping bower chest took up a healthy portion of the eastern section, its head resting on the ground. It vented towers of steam. Ghome's trunk floated in the center, open, full of chill hanging vapor and beautiful stolen faces. The Silvertech tree remained cactus-like in its defense. It glittered with the subtle movements of the deadly STTs roaming its surface. Kay pointed. "Leica, I see 3 of Ghome's attendants fleeing on foot to the south. Will you go get them, please? Don't harm them if possible." With relish, Leica tore off to the south, hurdling the compound wall with hardly a single bound. Kay desperately wanted out of his sweatbox of a suit. It was galling to wear and claustrophobic in the extreme, but there were creepers everywhere. He could see the hazy cloud of their dreaded spores hanging in the air, just waiting to disrupt his gifts. He would have to remain in the suit for the time being. Kay turned his attention to Ghome's attendants. There were 14 of them, all slender and beautiful, all nude, glistening from their bath, their colorful dots and swirls of aboleth thankfully gone. All were abased on the ground and seemed submissive. And then there was the Blanchford staff, rolling about the enclosure like horrid zombies, holding their knives, all poisoned with shadow tech, seeing demented phantoms before them, occasionally stabbing out at nothing, the ghostly drone of "Lord Blanchford" issuing from their near-dead mouths. Some were down on all fours, retching. A few lay on the ground, not moving at all. Leica returned with a flourish, scaling the walls with a 6-armed load of attendants and staff who had fallen by the wayside. She set the staff down and terrorized the attendants, herding them into a corner, dunking the 3 she had caught in the water, and adding them to the group. She loomed over them. "Quiet, attendants, quiet!" she roared. With Leica covering Ghome's attendants, Kay could focus on the staff. He could not bear to see the staff, people who had served his family loyally for years, some of whom had helped care for him as a child, slowly dying of shadow tech poisoning. He had to do something for them. He saw the wooden bowl the attendants had brought out earlier, full of dust. It was lying face down on the ground, the remnants of the no-berry dust, as Atha had called it, slowly blowing away. He had a thought. He fetched a bowl, scooping up as much dust as he could. The dust was fine and flighty. It took flight even the smallest of breezes, drifting all over the courtyard and covering everything in a fine layer. Gone. It was all gone. He went to the giant trunk, the staff limply stabbing at him as he passed. He searched the shelves within. More. She had to have more dust here. The staff needed it. It didn't take him long to find more no-berry. There were chests full of it, along with a score of pouches crammed full. The pouches, when squeezed or patted, emitted a small, measured amount of dust. They seemed perfect for his needs. He placed several pouches into his bag. He had the no-berry dust, now he just needed the water. Near the chest was a jug from which the attendants had washed Queen Ghome. He inspected it. It was nearly empty, containing a mere few cups full of rich, clear water. This must be water from Salanmay that Atha had shared with him in Carahill's store. He needed more, much more. There were several bathtub-sized tankards lined up inside Ghome's floating trunk, all filled with vast quantities of the water. One tankard was missing. Leica had taken it to douse Queen Ghome and the attendants. He felt a tug from within. He felt the urge to jump into the tankards and go to the bottom. The damn spores in his head, whispering to him once again. He forced himself to concentrate. Kay filled the jug with water. He recalled from his time with Atha how good the water had smelled, so clean and cold, though he couldn't smell it now through his helmet. Armed with the jug of water and the pouches full of no-berry dust, he found the staff member he thought was in the worst shape. It was clearly Andorra, his mother's personal assistant. She was wearing a flimsy and revealing set of clothes, slung low and cut high, something very out of character for the starched, upright, covered-up Scion lady he had known the whole of his life, the one who had lectured him on the virtues of promptness, cleanliness, courtesy, and etiquette, whose skills in calligraphy had taught him the proper penmanship. The lady who had full license to paddle him when he fell out of line, a license she exercised on several occasions. She was near death, her skin a sickly green, her eyes melted into dripping wax, and her teeth falling out by wretched strings. She was barely sensate. Her poisoned knife lay forgotten on the ground nearby. "Andorra, can you hear me?" She mumbled something in response and feebly reached for her knife. "No, stop!" Kay commanded. "I am your lord, and you will listen to me. Wake up, Andorra, wake up!" She hesitated, Taldaroga's hypnotic spell lessening in her head. My Lord, she rasped. He needed to lay his hands on and heal her, but it was the toxic nature of his Shadowtech suit that had done the damage in the first place, and to touch Andorra again might just send her over the edge and kill her. He tried to remove his gloves, but the Shadowtech wasn't budging. He recalled how the Noberry had eaten through the Simulacrum's suit. He took a pouch from his bag and vigorously patted his hands and forearms, coating the Shadowtech with a fine layer of Noberry. Very quickly, the Shadowtech reacted with the dust and bubbled away, revealing his bare hands and forearms, his skin red and sweaty from being confined in the hot suit. Now he could help her. Tipping the jug, Kay washed Andorra, singing into what was left of her ear, careful not to touch her with any part of him but his hands. He dabbed the pouch onto her skin. The dust began working moments later. It bubbled and seethed. It drew the Shadowtech out of her in a sooty cloud. He wondered what he could do about her teeth and her eyes. He tried patting her eyes gently with it. She blinked, and with every blink her eyes plumped back up, becoming whole again. Feeling better, sitting up, she opened her mouth, allowing Kay to work on her teeth, dousing her with water, coaxing new teeth from the holes left by the missing ones. He repaired her ears. Soon, she seemed fully healed. "How are you, Andorra?" he asked. Shy, grateful, she nodded, taking his hands and holding them against her heart. She noticed the drenched, revealing clothing she was wearing and tried to cover up. "I feel much better. Thank you, my lord. I apologize for my dress. You are part of our family, and you have our love and protection as best we can give it. There are many in need of assistance. Will you please help me triage those needing help most?" Yes, of course." She stood and ran to the nearest staff member. Andorra triaged the staff with a practiced critical eye, quickly organizing them in the center of the compound. Methodically, assisted by Andorra, Kay treated them with water and gentle pats of Noberry dust, one after the next. He took a head count. 24 staff. All were present, including the ones who had fallen by the wayside. Sighting, he could see no more scattered about. That was one less thing to worry over. Many had been dreadfully poisoned, but the Noberry dust and the cleansing water, coupled with Kay's ever more skillful use of it, was up to the job, and they were soon resting comfortably, free of the Shadowtech poisoning and Daroga's hypnosis. Some even stood and assisted Andorra, working together, refilling the jug and getting anything Kay needed. Always hard-working and industrious, the staff. Leica called out, "Jarokon! Mother awakens!" At last, Queen Ghome, wearing the artifact, stirred, raising her hand to her horned head, her necklace and headset gleaming. Kay went to her side. "Rothaba? Lady George?" he asked with excitement. "Can you hear me?" Leica came over and leaned down. "Mother?" she asked, shaking her slightly. "Mother?" Ghome sat up and blinked at Leica, her red eyes tentative. "Who are you?" She seemed frightened seeing the giant Leica leaning over her. She kicked at the dirt, trying to stand and get away. What sort of monster are you?" she said in a terrified voice. She touched the great horn sticking out of her head and probed her sharpened teeth with the tip of her tongue. "What have you done to me?" she cried in despair. She didn't know who Leica was. It was understandable she didn't recognize Kay in his horrendous Shadowtech suit, but Leica? Rothaba loved Leica. "I think of her as my daughter," she had once said. "Mother," Leica said, her voice shaking with sadness. "Remember, Leica!" Ghome squirmed in fear. Get away from me, please! Somebody help me!" Kay was horrified. The truth came upon him. This woman is not Queen Ghome. "Leica, this isn't her. It can't be her. She must have changed parts with one of her attendants when she ran into the passageway. She had a few minutes to do so. That must be what happened." He glanced at the group of attendants by the wall, all wet and glistening. One of them. She must be hiding as one of them. Leica stomped into the gaggle of attendants and drew her swords. "You, attendants, where is Ghome?" They crawled on the ground in terror. Kay removed the artifacts the woman was wearing, and Ghome's face collapsed into unconsciousness. He approached the attendants. "Well played, Queen Ghome, well played indeed. Unfortunately for you, we have discovered your deception and determined that you are hiding behind the face of one of your attendants. If you think that's going to stop us discovering you, think again." The attendants were frightened. "What are you going to do with us?" one of them managed to stammer. Leica hoisted her swords. "Talk, attendants! Who is Ghome? Answer, Leica!" "We don't know!" She stomped into their midst, scattering them. "Liars!" Kay had to step in and save the attendants. Leica, let's be calm for a moment. We're not going to hurt these people. We could place these artifacts on each until we discover the correct one, but that is too slow a process. I think I know how we can get this figured out much faster." He released his sight and wound it back in time, hoping to see the process in action and determine which one was Ghome. The tunnel leading into the sublevels was blacked out. His sight would not assist him in this case. Leica looked over the attendants. It must be one of the 4 who had been in the underground room with Ghome. But which was which? Soaking wet and crawling on the ground, they all looked rather the same. He would have to test them all. Hiding in their midst, certainly, was the crafty Queen Ghome. Kay wandered out into the central compound and rummaged through the wreckage. The staff, hard-working as always, had already begun the process of organizing the dead Jones into neat groups and had the marble bits of Ghome's beasts heaped into a pile. He soon found what he was looking for, the severed head of one of Ghome's marble beasts blown to bits by Leica's rifle. "Andorra," he said, "we'll be leaving soon. Please make certain everyone is fit to travel. We have a mile or 2 to walk." She nodded and gathered the staff. He picked up the marble head and returned. Kay selected an attendant from the group and motioned for her to come forward. Fearful, naked, dirty from crawling on the ground, she stepped out from the group towards Kay and bowed. "What is your name, please?" Kay asked. "Tentha Semini. I'm from Midas. I've served Queen Ghome since I was a little girl." "I see. You must be very loyal to her then." She saw Leica nearby holding her giant swords and fell silent. Kay held out the marble head. He was waiting to see if it turned to flesh as it had done so previously in Ghome's presence. If so, then Ghome was nearby. Nothing happened. Kay recalled Ghome's Geller powers seemed to be waning as the battle unfolded, the clouds parting and the beast transforming much slower. "Place your hands on the marble, please," Kay said. Tentha stood there in fear. She placed her small hands on the marble head, taking it by the horns. Nothing happened. "Thank you," Kay said. "Please rejoin the others." "What is to become of us?" Tentha asked. "I really don't know at this point. I won't harm you, you may rest assured of that. But doesn't mean I won't exile you here in this elder-down place either. Please rejoin the others. I thank you for your cooperation." Tentha stepped back and Kay went through the process of testing the rest. Each was shy and repentant. One tried to offer her body to Kay in exchange for her safety. He politely declined and sent her back into the group. So far, none had given life to the marble head. 3 left. He pointed at a black-haired girl and motioned for her to come forward and be tested. She held back and refused. Leica spat. "Come forward and be tested," she roared, seizing the girl by the arm. A fiery explosion ripped through Leica's hand, destroying it. Before Kay could react, the girl sprang and slapped him across the face with the palm of her hand. There was a pinkish glob of aboleth smeared in her palm. He just managed to catch a glimpse of it before... The force of the explosion shattered Kay's Shadowtech helmet, throwing him back. She took a handful of creeper and stuffed it into the shattered bubble. He could smell the perfumey spores, and his gifts went dark. His gifts were gone. She leapt away, sprinting towards the bower chest. The attendants burst into action. It was as if the gods had flipped a switch. One moment the attendants were cowering and compliant. The next they were attacking with ruthless skill and coordination. While feigning compliance, the attendants had been passing around a small pot full of aboleth they had hidden from him. They were almost fully rearmed with it. They swarmed Leica, pelting her with their hands and feet, punching her, kicking her, headbutting her, each blow creating a powerful explosion. They were overwhelming Leica. She fell, bleeding, dropping her weapons, one leg and 2 arms blown off. The bulk of the attendants sprinted away to defend Queen Ghome, while 3 stayed behind to deal with Kay. They held up their hands, pinkish powder rubbed onto their palms, and attacked. Kay was still somewhat blurry from Queen Ghome's attack, and his sight was gone thanks to the creeper. The attendants were skilled and fast. One came in and slapped him in the chest. Kay was rocked, but the Shadow Tech suit again held. Moments later, the attendant was dead, pierced to the belly by his carg. A savage kick blasted him in the back. Kay fell to his knees. The explosive power of the aboleth was devastating. His Shadow Tech suit was failing. Just as the attendants were ready to finish him off, they were met with a surge of fists and scraping knives. The staff had come to Kay's aid, overwhelming the attendants, fighting village style, binding the attendants' arms and hauling them down, stabbing them in the guts. Moments later, after a fierce struggle, the 2 attendants were dead. "Lord Blanchford, are you all right?" Andorra asked, panting, helping him up, careful not to touch the Shadow Tech. Kay checked himself over. His Shadow Tech suit was mangled, but it seemed to have shielded him from the brunt of the aboleth blasts. He glanced at the fallen attendants. One of them was the previously demure 10th Assemini, pierced to the belly. Nearby, Leica lay in the dirt, badly wounded. "Andorra, I want you to take Leica and go in the passageway at the north end of the enclosure. Be careful, it might still be a little smoky in there." He handed her a pouch of Noberry dust. "Take the jug of water and the dust from the pouch and heal her with it. You watched me, you can do it. Help her, and do not come out unless I say it's safe to do so." Working together, the staff quickly bore the fallen Leica away and disappeared through the archway into the lower levels. Alone and giftless, Kay shed what was left of his suit except for his Shadow Tech bag and took 2 of Leica's lags. He made his way across the compound in pursuit of Ghome. The attendants had set up a defensive perimeter in the front of the dormant bower chest. They had 2 panels open or were manually turning cranks. Slowly, 1 crank at a time, the bower chest breastplate was opening like a clamshell, revealing a dark, smoky interior. They were trying to get inside and take refuge, possibly to try restarting it. Kay could not allow that to happen. With her bower chest operating, Queen Ghome would surely escape and obliterate himself, the staff, and Leica in the process. There was Queen Ghome wearing the face of one of her attendants, protected by them. "Ghome, by creation, this is your end," Kay yelled, trying to sound bold. The attendants sprang forward to meet him, their hands, legs, feet, and hips shimmering with deadly aboleth. Kay cut loose with Leica's lags, the workmanlike hammers tapping out a steady dose of lead. The attendants fell like 10 pins. Occasionally a bullet would hit a spot of aboleth, touching off a fiery explosion. They tried to spring aside, leap away, and get to him. There was just too much lead flying. Soon, every one of them lay bullet-riddled on the ground. Now it was just Queen Ghome and Kay. He pulled Wilhelm's artifacts from his bag. "And now, you're going to put these on, even if I have to break your neck doing so." She gritted her teeth and charged Kay, her hands raised to slap him with aboleth. Without his suit, one slap would be the death of him. He lurched aside, but instead of trying to hit him, she sprinted past, heading towards the trunk. He sprinted after her. She was so fast. She reached the trunk, throwing open a number of drawers. As Kay arrived, she climbed up to the top of the trunk, holding a small controller in her hand. "We shall see who lives to see the sunset and who does not, grandson." She pressed the button. Nothing happened. She pressed it again and again. Still nothing. She threw the controller at Kay and dove at him, hands extended. Kay caught her by the wrists, driving her hands into the ground. There was an explosion that created a deep crater, displaced earth raining down in bits of debris on the both of them. He wrenched her head back, trying to slip the necklace of Wilhelm on. She sputtered like an enraged cat, trying to reach back to hit him. Kay wrestled the necklace over her head at last, and before she could utter another word, she fell unconscious. Kay wasn't going to be fooled a second time. He carried her to the pile of stone the staff had made and selected a piece of one of her marble beasts, slipping it into her limp hand. He wanted to make certain there were no tricks. And sure enough, with marked slowness, the piece transformed from a disembodied marble to an oily reptilian bit of flesh stinking of blood. Finally, Here was Queen Ghome asleep, and when she awoke, she would be a new woman. Rose above George, saint and genius, given lease in the waking world. He knelt down and carefully placed the headset, moving the feelers into position at the base of her skull. The going was much easier without the horns. The antennas jutted up through her wet mass of brown hair. Now she just needs to wake up. A fear-filled cry came from the other end of the enclosure. "Lord Blanchford!" Peeking out of the archway was the brown-headed crop of Andorra. Without his sight, he had to squint to see her clearly. She was pointing up at the sky. Kay glanced skyward. A blinding fireball like a second sun trailing a messy streak of smoke and condensation hurtled through the clouds, getting larger by the moment. It seemed to be headed right for the compound. "Andorra, get yourself and the others deep underground and do not come out," Kay shouted. A few moments later, the fireball came through the far wall in a calamity of smoke and shattered stone, taking a healthy bite out of the western enclosure. It slammed into the sleeping side of the bower chest, bounced off, and dug deep into the ground. A tower of earth was thrown into the air. Kay tried to protect the prone Queen Ghome from falling debris. The bower chest, aside from being roughly displaced by the impact, appeared undamaged. As the soot cleared, something stood in the heart of the crater. Something that roared. A giant figure came out, smoldering, stinking of ozone and scorched composites, encased in a black suit with a fishbowl helmet. It was one of the dead men of Mare from the ring high above. Queen Ghome had used her controller and brought one down like a summoned commando. His crooked antenna flashed red. His tanks issued brownish smoke. The smushed dead face inside the helmet turned milky shade of blue as caustic fluids were pumped in. He grimaced and gnashed his teeth. With grating slowness, he turned his head, seeing the scene around him, determining what chaos to create and whose bones to rend first. He locked onto Kay and Queen Ghome and tottered in their direction. Kay had hoped not to see another dead man from Mare ever again, not after the debacle in the grove, but here one was, his dead eyes focused on Kay. He remembered these dead men with dread, how just one took the combined efforts of himself, Inez and his Monomo wife Talaran, as well as King and Kai with her SK pistol to bring down. How it seemed unstoppable, how it was much stronger than a Monomo like Talaran and radiated bone-chilling cold. And most importantly, he'd had his gifts to battle it previously. Now he was alone, and his gifts creepered into silence. But he had learned much since that first horrendous encounter. He had learned that the tanks at their backs and the caustic fluids contained within gave the dead men a great deal of their power. Remove the tanks, deny them the fluids, and they were vulnerable. They were beatable. Therefore, his tanks would be vigorously targeted. With nothing else available to him, he would use his knowledge to fight this dead horror. They squared off, Kay trying to stay between the dead man and the helpless Queen Ghome. The dead man was at least 9 feet tall. He reached out with his gloved hands. Kay swiped them aside with his card, trying to slice them off. As before, the rubbery body warded off Kay's attack. He knew that when the dead man's face became a blue shade, his body would be practically indestructible. Scrambling to the ground, Kay crawled through his legs and got behind him. There were his tanks and a cluster of tubes and hoses circulating the caustic fluids that gave him life. Saddling his Karg, Kay drew Leica's lags and opened up in a long burst. Bullets bounced off the dead man's tanks, doing little damage. Before Kay could blink, the dead man was on him. It seized and rammed him into the ground, its grip impossibly strong and frigid in the extreme. There was nothing Kay could do. The dead man picked him up and hoisted him off the ground. Kay dropped the lags and drew his Karg. He aimed and loosed a blast of Silvertech. The blast passed through the dead man's chest and went out the other side, destroying his tanks. A choking cloud of brown smoke burst out. temporarily obscuring the daylight. Kay held his breath, knowing it would sicken him if he breathed it in. When the cloud dissipated, the dead man lost his bluish hue and turned dull gray. Now he was vulnerable. Kay slashed with his card, taking a chunk out of his leg. Without his fluids, the dead man was no longer impervious to damage. Kay lashed out and hacked off the dead man's arm. Denied his main source of power, the dead man's system went into backup mode. Emergency fluids were pumped in, and he turned a vivid shade of pink. He became like a crazed berserker. He saw Queen Ghome lying there on the ground, and he went to take her and do creation knows what to her flesh. Kay was on him, slashing, stabbing with his card. Kay took the dead man's knees out and chopped off his head, his flesh bright pink like candy. The dead man was done. Alone, Kay had fought the dead man much more efficiently this second time around and was victorious. A whistling sound caught his attention. Another fireball came crashing into the courtyard at the south end, and then another, and another. The sky was full of fireballs screeching in from all directions with a crosshatch of fiery contrails painting the sky. Craters blossomed all over, churned earth and crushed stone. The dead were everywhere. Many were giants in both male and female configurations, while others were tiny, barely a tenth K's size, like miniature people. The giants were slow and lumbering. The little ones, however, buzzed about like demons flying with rockets strapped to their back. They swarmed in on K, and though they were tiny, they were surprisingly strong. They latched on, grabbed at his clothes, poked at his eyes, and went for his neck, sought to trip him up and hold him still, their dead, shrunken faces jeering through their helmets. One of them got his card and flew off with it. Meanwhile, the giant-sized dead men were busy reviving the slain Jones and the attendants, pumping fluids into them, shrinking them down into vile animated dolls, all converging on him and Queen Ghome with glee. He saw only one chance. Nearby was Queen Ghome's trunk, still open, still spewing chill vapor, sporting a host of parts for her to try on and wear. He recalled the attendants bringing out several bowls, one full of no-berry dust, and the other bowl full of a pinkish powder that she dipped her hands into. Dust that explodes. Aboleth. That's what Leica had called it. If it worked for Ghome and her attendants, it would work for him too. He sprinted to the chest, laboring with the tiny dead that buzzed around, tormenting him. He found several shelves full of urns containing various oils and powders. There was a jade one full of fine pink powder. Eagerly, he thrust his hands into it, coating them, and then he set to the dead. Kay slapped at them and punched. He saw tongues of orange and green fire erupt from his hands. He felt the rush of compressed air and a slight moment of heat, but that was all. To the tiny dead, aboleth powder was devastating. It bit through their suits and destroyed their tanks, sending them shooting off in crazy directions. They went down in mangled heaps of mutilated flesh. One slap was enough to bisect them. The aboleth had intense power to direct the force of the explosion, to cut with precision. He slapped one in the face and shattered its miniature helmet. He saw the tiny dead face, the glittering doll-like eyes. He slapped it again, its head was gone. He punched another, blowing its arms and legs off. More aboleth, more powder. He took grim satisfaction in dispatching the rest, watching them struggle, listening to them scream and go still. Elsewhere, the tiny, reanimated attendants of Ghome were doing the same thing, pulling pots of aboleth from the shelves within the trunk, diving into it, coating themselves top to bottom and coming at him like little naked missiles, piping obscenities from their tiny mouths. He targeted them with Leica's lags, their tiny bodies going off like grenades, with each hit doing enough damage to be extremely dangerous. Through all the killing, he saw a figure pick up Queen Ghome and carry her away toward the bower chest. It was Taldaroga, not dead. He was crippled, bloody, near death but still alive. He was working the crank, trying to get inside the bower chest and steal away with Queen Ghome. He leaned against its metal body, cranking with all the strength he had left. The doors to its chest slowly parted. Kay could not let him get away. He covered himself in aboleth, pouring the urn over his head and letting it coat him. Then he sprinted to get to Taldaroga. A line of 10 giant dead stood before him, and more still were coming down. adding their number to the battle. Charging, K picked the clearest path and threw himself into a giant male. A terrific explosion shredded the male's black spacesuit and blew the clear bubble off his head. The force of the blow sent him down to the ground. K got behind him and went to work. K destroyed his tanks and also took several large chunks out of the dead man himself. Dark brown fumes erupted from his destroyed tanks, instantly sickening K. The dead man fell lifeless. A female dead 10 feet tall seized K, her howling dead face and matted white hair pushed up inside her fishbowl helmet. K punched and kicked, the aboleth sawing through her arm and chest like a fiery torch. He pressed on, but the dead were all around him, too strong, too many to contend with. The smoke and the fumes getting into his lungs made him see stars. Too many to fight. He watched with dismay as Taldaroga disappeared inside the bower chest with Ghome's limp body, the doors closing behind them. That was it. It was over. Exhaustion set in. The fumes were overcoming him. K fell to one knee. The dead towered over him. Explosions and craters, more dead arriving. The tiny dead attendants cavorting towards him, ready to lay into him with aboleth. A hand came down and plucked K from the ground just as the dead closed in. "Leica!" he cried. Fully repaired and wielding her swords and Dci rifle, Leica perched on the wall like a giant spider. "Leica, take Jarl-Khan below." She quickly made her way back to the archway, firing her Dci, knocking the dead down, though they got right back up again. She targeted a Jones battle unit manned by a dozen tiny dead Jones and obliterated it. "Leica, Ghome's escaped," K rasped. His body was roiling from the fumes. He wanted nothing more than to pass out. "Get Ghome another day. Jarl-Khan fights well. Jarl-Khan comes below to escape with Leica." She fired off one dart after the next, creating catastrophic damage, though the dead were beyond catastrophic. She was unable to target their tanks, and there was no stopping them. Leica arrived at the archway and dashed in. They took up defensive positions, Leica pelting away with her Dci, picking off tiny dead as they flew in, their bodies erupting in aboleth flashes. K could barely stand. More dead than he could count headed their way in a giant line of black spacesuits and blinking red lights. It was only a matter of time. Through the din of battle, K heard something. The slow, steady, ever-growing sound of turbines and hissing steam. Metal grated and linkages engaged. K watched with horror as the massive bower chest shuddered, lifted its head and neck, and uttered a roar of ancient fury. Fire appeared in the boiler windows and glowed strong, from dull red to vibrant orange to bright yellow. Towers of steam belched from its pipes. It had been restarted, with Queen Ghome and Taldaroga safe inside. It stood up on its two clawed legs and took in the scene around it. Looming over the dead, it locked onto K and Leica with its tiny orange eyes. The ground trembled. The bower chest took in a great expanse of air. "Leica, it's gonna blast us. It'll scour us right out of this passage." "Then Leica dies with Jarl-Khan." The bower chest let fly with a scalding wave of steam. Dead men flash-boiled into nothingness. Their tanks exploded, their gases consumed. As K and Leica watched, the bower chest waded into the courtyard and trampled on the dead, its wings sweeping them high into the air. It dealt with them as if they were nothing. Deadly smoke rose as giant bodies were trampled. The dead men turned and attacked the bower chest. Tiny dead buzzed around it like a swarm of bees. They pounded its haunches and climbed up its side. Aboleth explosions glittered off its sides. Working together, the dead got hold of its head and held it down. They piled on, pulling off metal scales. Nothing could stop the dead. The bower chest shuddered, held fast by the dead, overwhelmed. Two geysers of steam clawed their way out of the bower chest along with a thundering foghorn of fury that shook the ground. The dead men were tossed aside as the bower chest spun up to full power, the fire in its windows ramping up to white hot. The beast rose up with maximum fury, stomping and flapping, belching steam, throwing the dead men off, scalding them to nothing. More steam, more vanished dead men. the bower chest sweeping them from the enclosure. Soon, Kay, Leica, and a few stragglers were all that was left. The great metal beast, victorious, thundered forward and turned to face them. Its fire lessened and its doors opened once again. Out came a silver ball of light, flying high, contesting with the swarm of tiny dead not yet destroyed. Kay squinted to see. Was the silver ball of light King? It looked like him. Out came 4 people, a man and a woman assisting a third. The third was a female, hunched over, wearing a man's coat. The 4th person was a female in rags, lagging behind the rest. Kay and Leica emerged from the archway. "Philip? Thomasina?" Kay asked. "Is that you?" "Aye, Kay, it's us," Philip said, waving to him. "Aren't you a sight? Are you all right?" Philip and Thomasina were carrying Queen Ghome, her arms thrown over their shoulders. She wore Philip's duster. The 4th person looked to be Clara Wonderluck. What was she doing here? They met them in the center. Kay was overjoyed. "What happened to Tall Daroga?" "The Jones fellow, you mean?" Philip asked. "We saw him coming in, carrying this woman, and then he died. His wounds were too great." The woman, she looked up at Kay and Leica. She blinked in confusion, her headset sticking up through her hair. "Leica?" she asked, smiling, her voice filled with wonder. "Lord Blanchford? It is so good to see you both. It is so good to finally see you." "Lady Rothiba?" Kay asked. "Mother?" Leica said. She smiled and nodded. "It is I." "She asked us to restart the bower chest, said that going forward it would help us, that it would do as she commanded," Philip said. He blushed a little. "We couldn't say no, though it was pretty complicated getting it going again." The bower chest flapped up and perched on the western wall. It turned to Rothiba and bowed its head in reverence, acknowledging her as its master. "You need never fear it again," Rothiba said, trying to stand. Kay wobbled. The dead man's gases took their toll, and he fell to the ground. "Jarlkhan," Leica said, picking him up. "Jarlkhan!" "Kay, what's wrong?" Philip asked. I'm poisoned." They came around Kay, desperately trying to assist him. As he lay there, the enclosure spinning, he watched Clara Wonderluck running away as fast as she could to the south. He chuckled to himself, watching her run away as everything went dark. Could run pretty fast. And with that, we conclude Part 3, Chapter 8, The Dead Fell from the Sky. And that was a fun chapter. We see Queen Ghome, being a slippery customer, had switched parts with one of her attendants and was hiding amongst them, hoping to get away. And that was nearly successful, but not quite. Kay had all the attendants, dipped and washed, but they're good at feigning innocence, and since they're just apparently helpless people, it's easy to discount them as a threat. And they had a pot of aboleth that they got from somewhere. I always imagine that there's like little knockouts in the wall where there's pots of aboleth just for in case. And they got it, and while they were busy cowering on the ground, they were passing it amongst themselves, rearming with aboleth. And as you see, just about took Kay and Leica down. Kay also fixed his staff. I always try to portray Kay as being very mindful and considerate of his staff. These are throwaway characters. The red shirts, basically, well, a lot of them probably could have died and it wouldn't make a difference to the story, but Kay has known these people since he was a child, and he was going to do his best to save them, to heal them from their shadow tech poisoning, which he did. And good thing, too, because they came to his rescue as he was being overwhelmed by the attendants with their aboleth, and the staff just overwhelmed them and cut them to pieces. Pretty violent sort of thing, but they finally get the necklaces and headsets on Queen Ghome, but not before she pressed some funky controller and started bringing the dead down from the sky. I had always had that in my head, that you could bring the dead down to the ground like a shooting star if you needed them. If you have the right technology, I guess, if you know the right people on this world, and I really don't know who those people are. Somebody is maintaining these dead bodies around the planet. Apparently they provided her with some sort of technology that she could do that. I also had, in the earlier drafts, I had like a howitzer that would fire like zombies a long distance, shoot it. Instead of a artillery shell, it'd be a zombie. But I figured we don't need to turn this into a clown show. That's a little much, even for me. So I deleted the zombie howitzer. Although, who knows, maybe I'll bring it back. I still think it's kind of a funny idea. We'll see. Anywho, Rothuba has been restored at last. The Bower chest rallied like a trooper, took down the dead, and all is well. We are almost done. We only have 3 chapters left. Next week, there will be 2 chapters because one of them is only 2 pages long. So next week, part 3, chapter 9, Awake. And then the chapter after that, chapter 10, on HOBM, as we resolve the book. And we are almost done. Just a few more chapters, and it is over. Then, that is next week. Until then, this is Ren Presents. I am your host, Ren. Peace out.